Welcome back. We continue in the United Kingdom, where former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been found to have deliberately misled Parliament in a report by a committee of MPs. The committee, who was looking into whether Mr Johnson misled Parliament over COVID lockdown parties at Number 10, says it would have recommended suspending him from the House of Commons for 90 days. He was also found to have been complicit in a campaign of abuse against MPs investigating him. However, Mr Johnson has dismissed the report as a political assassination, and his supporters have criticised the inquiry and the committee chair, Harriet Harman. In the meantime, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has so far avoided giving his thoughts on the report and the fallout. Londoners say the findings of the damning report and Boris Johnson has lowered their opinion of their former Prime Minister. The conclusions of the report are seen as a new low for one of Britain's best-known and divisive politicians who just 4 years ago led the governing Conservatives to a landslide election victory, but whose tenure was cut short by scandal.
Yeah, I think I always had that sort of inkling that he was sort of that way inclined. But yeah, I think now that it's sort of been confirmed, I think my opinion has sort of gone down from Boris Johnson. So
I just don't like him at all. I never liked him to begin with, and now I just feel like he just shows time and time again how much of a buffoon he is. And people are still, and then people were moaning so much about Jeremy Corbyn, but he was actually trying to help us, and everyone just let him waste away. It's just ridiculous. And the things that they used to moan at Jeremy for was kind of minimal compared to what Boris does.
I think he resisted a bit too hard. He probably should have stepped down a bit earlier. So that maybe he kind of clung on to power a bit, kind of reminded me of a good old Trump. But at the end of the day, he was trying to do something, and he obviously believed in it. So I've got to respect that.
He's likeable and funny, but just should never have been in that role in the first place.
Why is that?
He's proven again not to respect governments.
Our London correspondent Teniola Oyetayo joins me now for more. Hi, Tenny. Quite interesting development so far. Help us understand the conclusions of the report.
Hi, Misled. Yeah, definitely very interesting. And it's not news that the former Prime Minister had a number of scandals whilst he was in office. And this is a result of one of the biggest one that ultimately forced him to resign last year. And it has to do with the parties that were allegedly held in Downing Street during COVID-19 lockdowns, when millions of people were unable to gather to see their loved ones, many of whom passed on because of COVID. And I say allegedly, I should say were actually held during the COVID-19 lockdown. So this is basically saying that the Prime Minister knew about those gatherings whilst people were unable to see their loved ones who were in hospital, who were dying. They had to hold funerals without people being there. So the main conclusion from the report is that Boris Johnson intentionally misled members of Parliament about what he knew about these said gatherings, one of which was actually to celebrate his birthday. The report also found that he misled the committee which was put together for the report whilst they were carrying out their duties investigating, and that the former Prime Minister was also complicit in a campaign, what they describe as a campaign of abuse against the MPs investigating him. So those are the main points from the report. In terms of the punishment, the committee recommended suspending him for 90 days, which is very rare and unusually long in matters of like this. But as we know, suspending him is no longer an option because he already stood down as an MP last week after he was able to see the report before it came out officially today. In a further sanction, the committee also recommended that he should not be given a former member's pass, which would have granted him access to Parliament after he had resigned as MP. So it's a huge blow for the former Prime Minister. And he has responded quite angrily, rejecting the report as rubbish and complete lies, while also maintaining that he had no idea about these gatherings at the time.
Antonio, I was going to say that, is there someone that's after him? Because there's a political assassination saying, some of his supporters criticizing the committee chair, Harriet Hammond. Was there an independence to this report? And does he have a right? Can he appeal this report?
Well, a lot of people have, while there's been a lot of condemnation for the Prime Minister, he has received some backing from his allies who are saying this is spiteful, that they're going after him. And I'm not sure he's not able to go against this report, but we do know that on Monday, a hearing will be held in the House of Commons. The publication of the committee's final report. After following the publication, the leader of the House has stated that the committee's finding will be subject to a debate and vote in the House of Commons on Monday. Essentially, this will basically allow MPs to express their views on the committee's findings, and that's expected to be a heated debate. We've already heard some very strong words against the Prime Minister today. Whether or not he'll be able to appeal, I'm not quite sure, but we will definitely know more from what happens on Monday and whether MPs vote for this.
Have we had anything from current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak?
So far, there's been no official comment from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, but I'm not sure he's likely to say too much on this. Because he's also been criticized for breaking COVID rules in the past. If we remember, he was even fined by the police, actually, alongside Boris Johnson for attending a birthday party at Downing Street while he was finance minister. And this was when Boris Johnson was prime minister. So not much from Rishi Sunak yet. But earlier this morning, we did hear from his spokesperson alluding to the fact that the prime minister hasn't read the report yet. Whether there'll be an official statement or response, we're not sure. But like I said, it'll be interesting to see his reactions when on Monday MPs are expected to have a free vote on whether or not to approve the report, as it will most likely lead to some public infighting within the Tory party, many of whom are also not happy with the current Prime Minister either, who has faced, a number of scandals himself since coming to office last year.
So scandal in office, scandal out of office. Is there a political future for Boris Johnson?
I think that's the big question at the moment. But I'm not quite sure I'm the right person to ask. But from what I've heard, some analysts do believe that this could be the end for his political career, while others say anything is possible in British politics. So we'll have to wait and see. I know if you remember, last year, he did try to run for office again after resigning. So, anything is possible. He's a very bold man, has his way with his words. Whether or not he can come back, we'll have to wait and see. But for now, people are very disappointed. The issue of COVID, it's a very touchy subject. Britain recorded one of the world's highest death toll from COVID. And a lot of people were unable to say goodbye to their loved ones in person, with many people having to do that via Zoom. You will remember that image of the Queen sitting alone at the funeral of her husband because of COVID measures that Boris Johnson himself put in place during the pandemic. So there's been a lot of anger and disappointment towards him, and now even more with this report, and also how he has responded to the report, calling it rubbish, and also saying that people are after his political career. So just looking through what people have been saying, especially those who lost loved ones, there's this huge disappointment. Many of them are saying that he owes them an apology because while he was telling them to stay at home, someone described it as he was having a gathering, having drinks and having a laugh with his colleagues. So it's really disappointing times. Whether or not he can come back from this, we'll have to wait and see. But like I said, anything is possible in British politics, Millicent.
And Tani, also, does this affect the Conservatives in terms of, the overall politics in the UK?
I didn't quite get the question.
Could this have any effect on UK politics, especially as regards the Conservatives?
I think definitely. with a national election expected next year, this definitely adds to the political headache for current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the Tory party, which has had a number of resignations and scandals in less than a year. And I mean, 3 prime ministers in how many months, like we saw last year. But I think the main change now, triggered by Boris Johnson's exit, is the special election to replace his seat in the House of Commons. 2 allies of Johnson, as we know, Nadine Dorries and Nigel Adams, also quit last week, sparking 3 by-elections, which is an even more unwanted headache for the Prime Minister. So the Conservative Party is not really in a good place at the moment, and we'll have to see how people vote in the next national elections, because a lot of people are not happy with the cost of living crisis, with this scandal also, the resignations that we've seen time and time again within the party. A lot of people are not happy, so we'll definitely have to see how this changes things for the party. But for now, it's not really looking good.
All right, Teniola Uyetayo, our London correspondent. Thanks.
Thanks, Millicent.
In Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces, RSF has condemned the killing of the governor of West Darfur State, Kamis Abaka, on Wednesday, but officials in Sudan are accusing them of the murder. Sudanese officials had accused the RSF of killing the governor, who had hours before said the RSF and allied militias were committing genocide against people from the Misled ethnic group. But the RSF put out a statement saying the governor was killed at the hands of 2 outlaws, despite attempts by its forces to protect him. The paramilitary force is demanding an inquiry into the circumstances that led to the death and said it will not hesitate to bring to justice any member of its force found to have been involved in the incident. Sudan's health sector was already on the edge of collapse due to a lack of resources before the conflict, and it has been shattered by nearly 2 months of fighting between the army and the RSF across the country. More than 60 hospitals in conflict zones have been put out of service, and the 29 that are still operating are threatened by closure due to power and water cuts and shortage of staff. This has put patients who need constant care and close monitoring at risk of infection and death.
Kidney dialysis patients are dying, and dead bodies have been left to decompose in a morgue and in city streets as Sudan's war rages on, despite efforts by volunteers and aid workers to keep critical health care running. In El Obeid, southwest of Khartoum, a power outage lasting more than 2 weeks has put a kidney dialysis unit at risk of shutdown and led to the death of at least 12 dialysis patients. Residents say roads into the strategically located city are under blockade, with supplies of food and medicine cut off. Engineers tried to reach a local power station to restore electricity, but according to the doctors' union, were assaulted before they could arrive. Renal disease constitutes an important health problem in Sudan, where treatment is limited and expensive. According to the International Society of Nephrology, an estimated 8,000 people in Sudan depend on dialysis to live. In Ombada, on the outskirts of Omdurman, the main hospital has had to halve the frequency of patients' visits and shut down their operating rooms. The General Director, Ala Eldin Ibrahim Ali, says this is because of power cuts and lack of fuel for the generator. The situation in Darfur in western Sudan is even more desperate. El Geneina, the worst affected city, has been hit by waves of attacks by Arab militias backed by the RSF, while cut off from humanitarian relief and phone networks.
Practically, there are no healthcare services at all in El Geneina. It's a city of death. It's probably the worst part of Sudan currently. We know that we spoke to numerous healthcare professionals who fled to eastern Chad, and what they're describing is just simply horrifying and something that's completely heartbreaking. So the bottom line is, yes, there isn't healthcare services in Al Junaina. In the entire region of Darfur, there hasn't been supplies that reach the area because of safety situations.
The Janaina Teaching Hospital, the most visited hospital in West Darfur State, was forced to close in late April. Its patients and doctors were evacuated. Sudan is now in desperate need of some agreements between warring factions to save the healthcare system and its patients from extinction.
Still to come on the program. An animated TV series hopes to tackle climate change in Pakistan. We have details when we return. Survivors from a fishing boat that sank off southern Greece in one of Europe's worst migrant disasters say up to 100 children may have been on board. At least 78 people have already been confirmed dead in the disaster. But scores more could still be missing at sea, with reports suggesting that up to 750 people were aboard the vessel. The country's Coast Guard has been criticised for not intervening earlier, but authorities say their offers of aid were refused. Rescuers are still scouring the seas off Greece in a massive search operation as hopes of finding more survivors dwindle. Shocking accounts of a large number of women and children travelling in the hold of the ship have come via medics who treated the mostly male survivors. Psychologists treating dozens of survivors of the shipwreck of Greece's coast say that many are still in shock and are asking for family members. Greece declared 3 days of mourning. Authorities say it's unclear how many had been on board. They are investigating an account from a European rescue support charity that there could have been 750 people on board the 20 to 30 meter long boat.
They are looking for their relatives, for the people that they were together in the shipwreck. I think the most significant thing is that we have people to support them as much as we can support them after this. Someone was telling me that the moment things happened, it was so quick that they were shouting, they were trying to catch to one another, just to jump, take off their clothes, not to have weight. It was all so quick, and they still feel that they are inside. They don't feel that they are here, that their foots are here. They feel that they are still inside, that they are going to die. One person was crying and calling that I want to phone call my mother in order to inform her that if I'm going to die, at least I have spoken to her. They want to find a way to communicate with the people they have back, in order, if anything happens to them, even now, at least to inform them that now I'm talking to you, now I am alive.
People are still in shock. They are trying to give some details now about their relatives, their friends that were in the boat, and they cannot find them. They are still in shock. They are trying to talk with their family in their countries. It's very difficult because almost no one speaks English. So the problem is how to communicate, even for the emotional reasons. Some of them are in a really terrible emotional situations. It's obvious, but they're still in shock. It's about 1-2 days they're going to be in shock. We're expecting them afterwards some PTSD expressions. Almost everyone is with family. Some of them with friends. Some of them talked about having kids. Having a kid and he doesn't know where is it. They don't know where they are. They're in a foreign country for them. They don't know what's going to happen to them next. This is what they can't express because it's difficult because they don't understand us.
Well, 4 survivors of the shipwreck, they're being sheltered at a warehouse at the port of Kalamata a day after their rescue. 104 rescued men had been brought to the port, where they were given medical assistance and psychological support. Hellenic Red Cross nurse Ekaterini Isata adds that 30 of the migrants were transferred to hospital for further care.
They arrived 104 people, young men, and 30 people went to this hospital for the treatment in the hospital and for better safe for them. One man started to cry and tell me, I want my mother, I want my mother. It was very difficult time, of course for him, but and for us to listen in a young boy that he has a very dreadful psychological situation and problems of health to need his mother. It was very difficult time. We gave first aid and psychological support to all these people. Of course, it was very difficult times, and we think all things will be okay for all these people.
Very difficult indeed. The European Union is hosting an aid conference to seek funds for Syria, which has been hit by more than a decade of conflict and an earthquake that ravaged the region earlier this year. Foreign ministers of several Middle Eastern countries are attending the conference in Brussels, where EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said the bloc seeks to bring hope to the country as 90% of its population is living in poverty. The EU conference comes as 3 United Nations agencies have said the needs are enormous and warned that only a tenth of necessary financing has so far been secured for 2023 projects to help people inside Syria and the refugees in the region.
The Syrian people, the Syrian refugees, those displaced, those suffering desperate levels of poverty, brought about by more than a decade of conflict and repression at the hands of the Syrian regime, has suffered a painful and traumatic year since we last gathered in this forum. It is a year which has seen a devastating earthquake in the region, bringing yet further misery to Syrians in the northwest of the country, not to mention millions of Turkish people across the border. Already, 90% of Syrians living in Syria live in poverty, 60% suffer food insecurity. They barely know where the next meal is going to come from. It is unacceptable that Syria has been brought so low. It is unacceptable that we tolerate the present plight of the Syrian people. Our task must be to find ways of working positively towards the resolution of the conflict. And our task today, more precisely and concretely, must be bringing hope, some relief.
My appeal is simple. Help us help the Syrian people. We are asking for $11.1 billion, our largest appeal worldwide. And we have no time to spare. Food or cash assistance will run out for 2.5 million Syrians next month alone. Funding our appeal and disbursing funds quickly must be priority number one. But we also know that we cannot go on like this forever. We must break the vicious circle in which deprivation breeds conflict and conflict deepens despair.
And to Asia, where several thousand South Korean and US troops have taken part in joint live-fire exercises and a show of force after North Korea's failed attempt last month to launch a spy satellite ratcheted up tensions in the region. A total of 2,500 troops took part in the drills in Pocheon, northeast of Seoul, supported by cutting-edge military assets, including South Korean F-35 fighters, K-9 self-propelled howitzers, and US F-16 jets and Grey Eagle drones. The drills, overseen by South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, are also being held to mark the 70th anniversary of the alliance between the two nations and the 75th anniversary of the founding of the South Korean military. The US has about 28,500 troops in South Korea. Meanwhile, North Korea has condemned South Korea's live-fire drills with the United States. Spokesperson from the Ministry of Defense says North Korea's forces will sternly respond to any kind of protests or provocations by enemies. South Korea's military said that the North launched 2 short-range ballistic missiles on Thursday, as several thousand South Korean and US troops took part in joint live-fire exercises. The isolated North has previously reacted angrily to the allies' military drills, calling them a rehearsal for its invasion. We're in Australia. It has blocked Russia from building a new embassy near its parliament, citing a spying risk. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said intelligence agencies had given very clear security advice on the move. Laws specifically drafted to halt construction were rapidly passed on Thursday after legal attempts to block the Canberra development failed. Moscow's current embassy will not be affected by the new laws, which have bipartisan support. The new legislation also acknowledges that Russia may be eligible for financial compensation.
Today, the government will introduce legislation to terminate the Russian Federation's lease for a proposed diplomatic presence just next to Parliament House. We anticipate this legislation will pass both the House of Representatives and the Senate this morning. This action follows the conclusion of long-running litigation regarding the site. The government has received very clear security advice as to the risk presented by a new Russian presence so close to Parliament House. We're acting quickly to ensure the lease site does not become a formal diplomatic presence. The government condemns Russia's illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine.
The principal problem with the proposed second Russian embassy in Canberra is its location. This location sits directly adjacent to Parliament House. The government has received clear national security advice that this would be a threat to our national security, and that is why the government is acting decisively today to bring this long-standing matter to a close.
The Russian government is, we will await what response occurs. But we've anticipated that as well. We don't expect that Russia's in a position to talk about international law, given their rejection of it so consistently and so brazenly with their invasion of Ukraine.
Well, Russia has called that a hostile action. And finally on the programme, a brand new animated television series, Planet Champs, which focuses on environmental issues, has premiered in Islamabad. Its creators brimmed with excitement as they saw potential for the show to make a positive impact in Pakistan. The series, which stars a pair of teenage superhero siblings who fight villains to save Earth, aims to raise awareness of key environmental challenges in the South Asian country. The show's creator, singer, songwriter Aaron Haroon Rashid said the need to take charge and make changes to improve Pakistan's environmental situation inspired the show's conception.
These are serious issues we're facing in Pakistan when it comes to the environment, and it can only be changed by us taking a charge and making those changes. Of course, there are bigger issues like climate change, which needs to be addressed globally. But some of the local environment issues, we can definitely, whether it comes to tree plantation, concerns about deforestation, plastic waste is a huge issue, especially in the tourist areas. And apart from that, there's air pollution issues that we can take a stand to make a difference. The interesting thing about this TV series is that it villainizes some of the harm and things that are being done in a negative way. For instance, one of the sayings is, villains litter, don't be a villain, be a planet champ. And that goes throughout. Like if there's an episode on importance of conserving energy, same thing. Villains waste energy, don't be a villain, be a planet champ.
I'm a planet champ, are you? That's our programme this evening, The World Today. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker.